Why have Spurs signed Conor Gallagher? What next for Mac Guehi?
Quick one before you watch today's episode. Usually we record every Thursday, and this week in particular we recorded before obviously the Glasner and Mac Guehi news dropped. So we've had to get a little creative in the edit. Hope it makes sense, but most of all, hope you enjoy.
And could Tammy Abraham be coming back to England? Well, to delve into this on today's show, we've got Jon Mackenzie, we've got JJ Bull and David Ornstein. Welcome to the Deal Sheet. Well, David, we have to start with Conor Gallagher, a Spurs player now. We spoke about it on the Athletic FC podcast. Also, Villa in for that deal as well. Tell us more. Is it a good fit?
I think it's a really good fit for Tottenham, but I will defer to my esteemed friends in good time. Tottenham had a bit of an emergency situation because of the injury to Rodrigo Bentancur and the surgery that will rule him out for some months. I think they needed something in there anyway. Palhinha is the only sort of fit, available senior player at the moment, and he's on loan. That said, it wasn't their transfer priority for this window. That was like a left-sided attacking player, which is why they looked so heavily at Antoine Semenyo. And it'd be really interesting to see if they do go for somebody in that position after this deal. But there was a need. They also require some energy, some leadership, a good character, somebody that I think can improve the culture, the environment around Spurs at the moment. He's homegrown, he's 25 years old, so he should be around coming into his peak. He's got the motivation of trying to get into the England squad for the World Cup, which I don't think that door is completely closed. And when you look at 40 million euros in January, which is a tough market for any club, to get decent players of decent value, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. Aston Villa were there, absolutely. You could say they did the legwork on this. They were in an advanced position with both the player who they thought wanted to come to them and Atletico Madrid. But it seemed like it was being explored as a loan with an option, obligation, and Spurs came in very quickly and decisively, which is quite rare for them, you could say, and put down 40 million euros and seemingly an attractive player package as well. And at that point, Villa had to think about their PSR, financial constraints, and they weren't able to go through with it. And some credit to Johan Lange, the co-sporting director of Tottenham, who led on this deal, we're told, and also some input from Fabio Paratici, the other co-sporting director, who's on his way out of the club after this window. The ownership clearly have backed them in this instance. And Thomas Frank spoke to the player as well and convinced him that it would be a good move for him despite the difficulties at Tottenham right now. So you could say it was an impressive hijack. Tottenham, if this is the good deal that I'm presenting, have almost set themselves a bit of a standard now that you've got to act like this if you want to be getting the best or better players, and they need to replicate it or raise the bar. In time, they've got Rafi Mawson coming in from Manchester City, which we reported exclusively on The Athletic, who will help in that sort of recruitment and football operations area. And this is an attempt by this new Tottenham regime to get things moving in the right direction. I think we need longer to be able to judge them on that. Clearly among the fan base and much of the public, the jury is out so far on what they've done since the departure of Daniel Levy, what's going on the pitch. They've got a massive game against West Ham this weekend. But in terms of the recruitment in Conor Gallagher, I think that's box ticked. It's a job well done.
Okay. JJ, good player, but Spurs have a whole heap of problems. League form, injuries. Is he the player they need tactically?
Well, let's see what the problems are, because then we can solve that. So Tottenham's biggest problem, or Spurs' biggest problem, is that they can't really score goals. They have a very low non-penalty expected goals. Whether this is linked or not, you'll be the judge. But they also have the second most long passes of any team in the league. But what we have here is their progressive passes are also not very high up. So the problem really is getting the ball forward, how like progressing the play, especially through the middle. They can't really do that. And they play the fewest through balls of any side in the Premier League, in fact, and also fewer than many individual players. So the problem is progression and progressive passes. Maybe a midfielder will solve that. However, Conor Gallagher's progressive passes are also not very high. So
okay.
It's maybe not what he's best at. And the thing I remember like Conor Gallagher being best at Chelsea or Palace was really receiving the ball kind of higher up. And you can see here on this lovely graph that he plays centre midfield or left midfield, but he normally comes into an attacking position. So when he's on the left, if they're pushing the ball forwards, he's closing players down and helping with pressure, basically. He's really good at closing and running around and doing all the busy work. So that's what Conor Gallagher does. So for Spurs, when they push the ball forward, maybe that's what he'll be able to do. But Spurs, as we say, their problem is scoring goals. Most of their goals come from, 36.7% come from set pieces. It's open play and progression. And like I said, Gallagher, when he was at Chelsea, Pochettino loved him. So he'd play him in one of the advanced midfielders or as part of the two sitting midfielders. So a 6, 8 or a 10, you can play them all. He had the 12th most tackles and interceptions when he was playing for Chelsea, so really good at helping with pressure, wins the ball, very busy like we said. He also had the 31st most shot creating actions. So he does help create.
He does do stuff.
Yeah. I think he's probably an improvement on what they already have. He's definitely an improvement, I would say, on Palhinha and on Bentancur, and you can see the difference between Palhinha and Gallagher. So you can see he's a lot more progressive. He is a lot more, still not the magic wizard that you want maybe to help get the ball forward, but I think an upgrade on these. And I was thinking, well, Bentancur, so they can't pass the ball through, but I remember him being quite good at these sorts of things. So is he rubbish? Or is it something more to do with what Spurs are doing?
That's a very, very good question.
Yes. So I went through it, and you can see that Bentancur's progressive passes are less than half of what they were last season, and even less than that the season before that. It's probably tactical. So it's probably what Spurs are doing. And what Spurs do is when they build out from the back, they tend to circulate a little bit between the defenders, so it's a bit of a horseshoe thing. And then eventually they'll just ping it long to someone on the wing. Normally Kudus, who'll have his back to goal, someone will come up to him, he try and build from there. They don't play through the middle. You can see Sunderland's a good example of this. No one's really receiving the ball in the middle, so it's mostly going down the wings, and that's all they're doing. They're not really progressing play. So will Gallagher fix that? I don't really know if he will. What he will do is retain the ball. He'll be able to help them with pressure when they push it forward, and he should give them some options in midfield that they don't already have. And he's also, like David said, a captain, a leader. I think it will help with the culture of that. I think that is relevant.
Okay. I like that. Let's move on to another one of Conor Gallagher's former teammates. Crystal Palace captain Mac Guehi. I mean, look, January's here. Certain teams need players in that position, namely Manchester City, Liverpool.
Definitely think Manchester City want to do it, and that's why they've kind of ratcheted up their interest this month, off the back of injuries to Ruben Dias and Josko Gvardiol. But it's easier said than done. People seem to think around the 35, 40 million pound mark could entice Steve Parish to say, yeah, you know what, with less than 6 months to go before he leaves as a free agent, I'll take that. It's worthwhile as opposed to losing him for nothing. But he hasn't put a price on it, to my knowledge. That's just an assumption in the market. And so, yeah, don't hold me to this, because it's not impossible that a deal materialises when Manchester City are so fierce in wanting him and needing him.
Okay. I mean, look, Mac Guehi's sitting there licking his lips, all these clubs after him, John. But let's focus on the Premier League in particular, and two big names, Manchester City and Liverpool. I'm wondering which one of these two teams needs him the most.
Well, yeah, I mean, both teams need him a lot, and that's why we're having this conversation, right? But I think that what you get with someone like Mac Guehi and why he's so attractive in this market is because he's a well-rounded profile. He's going to do the defensive things well. He's going to do the on-ball stuff well. And I think in the past, maybe as an elite side, you could get away with just getting primarily on-ball players for centre-backs. Now, I don't think that's the case anymore. So if you can get someone like Guehi, you know you're going to get someone who's good on and off the ball. For example, if we compare Guehi with Virgil van Dijk, we can see it's ball progression and attacking play. You're getting the same sorts of numbers from Guehi and Virgil van Dijk. But I think what's also interesting here is we can see that when it comes to the defensive side of the game, they're very different kinds of profiles. You can see Van Dijk is a much more passive player, where Guehi likes to step forward and be aggressive, make interceptions, blocks, ball recoveries. So yeah, the reason why City are going for someone like Guehi is because he has that profile. He's at a club where he's gettable, so they'll be able to prize him away from Crystal Palace. Obviously, out of contract at the end of the season changes things as well. City are obviously moving centre-backs on at the end of the season. They are also without centre-backs in the immediate term because of injury.
What about Palace then? I mean, you talk about Guehi potentially having his pick of all the sweets, but Crystal Palace are still running a business, and football is business. What's the best option for them? Because also, we haven't even spoken about the future of their head coach, Oliver Glasner, as well. This could be a really pivotal time for Crystal Palace.
And around all of that is a huge decision from a footballing and financial perspective on what Palace should do in relation to Guehi. The benefits from a financial and football perspective of maybe going further perhaps even winning the Conference League, could outweigh the idea of cashing in on him.
Yeah, I've done a bit of like back of an envelope working out of costings, and this is entirely hypothetical, but just to give people the sort of sense of what's at cost for Palace here. You have to take into account what impact that's going to have on them in the immediate term as well. So in this instance, I've just gone with Opta currently have Palace 11th predicted overall, and I've just said let's imagine that they sell Guehi and as a result they drop down the table a little bit. So I've gone with a fabled £2.7 million per position. So let's say if they drop down to 16th, then they're going to make a loss of around 13.5 million. So already you're having to think about like what difference that's going to make. I haven't actually taken into account what would happen in the Conference League as well. But the Conference League prize money isn't massive, so it wouldn't have a huge amount of impact on them there. But what it would do is it would impact their ability to get into the Europa League, right? Because if you win the Conference League, you go into the Europa League next season. So I've then worked out on the other side here what the best case and worst case and median case scenarios are for Palace if they keep Guehi, right? And
John, do you sleep? Do you ever sleep?
Yeah, well, this helped me get to sleep, to be honest. But the best case scenario is that they win the Conference League and they get into the Europa League. So if they, and the best case scenario there is they win the Europa League the following season, right? Which would give them around £58 million in prize money. And then I've costed in also the gate receipts that would add to them as well. And again, we've got to consider the fact that if they keep Guehi, then they're going to have the ability to finish higher last season, so they'll get the benefit from that as well. So we're talking like the absolute best case scenario here for Palace is that they make around nearly 80 million if they keep Guehi, in terms of like the things that in terms of the costings and stuff. That's an incredible best case scenario, right? They've got to win the Conference League and then win the Europa League, so it's pretty unlikely. The worst case scenario is that they just immediately get knocked out of the Conference League, so they get the gate receipts for that. Obviously, they're still making around 13 million in terms of keeping them on to finish higher in the league this season. So we're talking like 14 million. So when you compare the worst case scenario with the Bell Now scenario, it's just like David says, it's sort of peanuts for a club of that stature. It's a nice bit of pocket money. And the big question, I guess, then is you work out, well, where are you going to fall in between the best case and the worst case scenario? And the median case I've got here is you win the Conference League, but then you do very badly in the Europa League, and you're talking about around 40 million, which is, higher probably than the fee that they would get for him. Hopefully what this gives you an example of is like the kind of calculations that clubs have to go through. You've got like almost a guaranteed fee right now, but that is going to impact your prize winnings at the end of the season, versus if we keep him on, maybe we'll bump up a little bit more, but you're still relying on winning competitions that you may not win. So it's like a guaranteed fee now versus maybe a higher fee, but maybe not much of a benefit at all. So yeah, that's the decision they're going to be faced with.
You were the kid that did a lot of extracurricular stuff at school, weren't you? You really were. That is good explanation though. Let's move on. Let's talk about Aston Villa once again, actually. And this one is regarding Tammy Abraham. We spoke about this on the podcast as well, the Athletic FC. Tammy Abraham potentially coming to Aston Villa, but also Dunya Marlin in that deal. Can you just tell us about this sort of intrinsic sort of web of player movements?
You've mapped this out very well because it directly links from a financial conversation. In that case, Crystal Palace, now Aston Villa. They've got to think so carefully because we've seen how close they've gone to the limits around financial fair play, profitability and sustainability. And they've done remarkably well considering that. And let's see how they do going forward. On Tammy Abraham, there's the footballing element and again the financial element. So from a football perspective, they had him previously on loan. So that built a connection, both from them to him and him to them. And so there's that background. And I think they would like to work together again. But that's easier said than done. He's on a really high wage in Turkey with Beşiktaş, and that's part of Turkish football's and the leading clubs there's desire to really try and improve. Good money if you can get it. And then there's the sort of club-to-club equation. He was on loan from Roma at Beşiktaş with an obligation to buy that I think has been activated. And so it reminds me of the Wout Weghorst situation where he was on loan from Burnley in Turkey and Manchester United had to do a deal with one or the other club.
So is he a Besiktas player as of now? Is that what you're saying?
Technically, yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
And therefore, the negotiation, I think, would need to be between Aston Villa and Besiktas to try and say, don't sign him as per the activated obligation, but let us buy him off you or Roma. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I was told it's a conversation between Villa and Besiktas.
So how would that work? Money goes from Villa potentially to Besiktas, and then Besiktas play Roma for the money of basically loaning him or buying him.
In theory, or Besiktas do it first with Roma and then Villa do it afterwards.
It's all complicated, man.
Yeah, it is. And in and amongst that, you've got Marlon, subject to this proposed move to Roma. Many people said, that's quite easy then. Villa will just negotiate with Roma. That's why I explained the Besiktas element. It wouldn't be the case. But I think the harder part in this is actually his earnings and whether Villa will be able to fund that at this moment in time. And so before recording this, the most recent noises I've had from the situation is that extremely difficult to do. And maybe impossible. So he's one of a number of strikers that Villa are looking at. And don't forget that Ollie Watkins remains the main man, which is part of the reason why Marlon has been allowed to go. I'm not saying Tammy Abraham would have a problem with that, and there are others in the market who would come in with that understanding. But if you're paying an absolute king's ransom in terms of the salary and a hefty transfer fee, then that might not be plausible. And so his situation is one that definitely could develop in this market, and there are other clubs interested in him as well.
Okay.
Within the Premier League, I think the others were more towards the lower end, which would not be as appealing to him as Aston Villa, who are flying high. But there's absolutely no certainty that this will happen. It's just one of the irons that Villa have in fires, and we'll see if it comes to fruition.
Yeah, when it comes to buying strikers, what you're essentially doing is buying goals, right? And that's the risk element with a striker, I think, because if you are going to buy a player who has guaranteed goals in them, you're going to be paying a large fee for them, because that essentially you're saying, the money we get comes through you scoring goals for us. So if you're going to score goals for us, we're going to have to pay that kind of fee. But I think that's what's so interesting about a profile like Tammy Abraham, because I think what you're looking at there then is quite a risk, in principle, quite a risky profile, right? Because he's been here, there, and everywhere, and I think there's two areas where that risk stands out for me. One of them is that in terms of his finishing, so he's a player who has consistently finished under his expected goals. So which is it's an interesting profile to look at, right? Because on the one hand, putting up decent expected goal numbers is a sign that you're getting into the right areas. In that respect, you are able to play at the highest level. But if your finishing is consistently low, so I've got the figures here, we can see the Aston Villa season in 18-19, 25 goals, 25 XG basically. But beyond that, every season after that is pretty much an underperformance of his expected goals. So you can say we've got enough evidence now to suggest that this player is going to be probably a career underperformer on expected goals. So there's one element of risk. The other element of risk that people will talk about with Tammy Abraham is injury history. And again, actually interesting, if you look through the data, there's only this one season at Roma in 22-23 where he has an ACL injury, where he misses 47 games because of that. But beyond that, actually, and hasn't really had a recurrence of that in more recent seasons. Because of that, you could maybe say, well, the risk is slightly mitigated here. And so the big question, I suppose, with Tammy Abraham is how much does that risk translate into cost for a club like Villa, because I've got just the examples this season of strikers who were signed. On the one hand, so the red numbers here are the guys who they spent a lot of money on, these clubs. So you've got Hugo Ekitike, Walter Mada, João Pedro. These are expensive strikers, but they've translated into goals. That's why you spend that kind of money. But we've got other strikers who are actually on frees as well, right? So Dominic Calvert-Lewin, 9 goals from a free contract.
Who would have thought?
Now, obviously, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's in the same situation as Tammy Abraham in that he has a large contract already. So Leeds is still having to pay a lot of money for his contract, despite the fact they don't have to pay a fee. But I think what this suggests is that there is value to be found in the market by taking on board that risk. Dominic Calvert-Lewin, generally a career underperformer of XG, and someone who people talk about his injury history, right? So a very similar kind of profile to Tammy Abraham. So I guess the situation here is, to what extent do you feel as though you're getting the value for money for a player like this by paying maybe a lower fee and not having to pay as much in wages, although that remains to be seen, versus shelling out 60, 70 million on a guaranteed striker who is going to score. And I think that's what is happening here, is that clubs are seeing Tammy Abraham as maybe a risk option, and therefore maybe you'll get value for money for that. But as David's saying, it does sound as though the cost for this isn't going to end up being cheap when you actually, when it all comes out in the wash. So that will be what Villa will be having to weigh up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen an element of this risk in some of the signings that have happened in the summer, especially around strikers. Victor Gyökeres, Šeško to a certain degree, some might say have underperformed. Dominic Calvert-Lewin, as we've seen, might have overperformed. Why is it so hard to get that striker thing solid for teams?
Well, as John's kind of already said, strikers score goals. That's why they cost money, because that's the most important commodity within football.
Right.
But there's very few in the world that can score lots of them. And if they exist, then they cost lots of money. So like Erling Haaland is going to cost you a bit of money.
Yeah, quite a lot.
But like in the top 5 European leagues, there are only 11 players who have scored over 10 goals in the league this season. So there's not that many. And then when you look at them,
that is a stat.
Well, it's only halfway through the season, I guess,
Yeah.
right? Because strikers don't score that many goals. You don't get many who score 20 plus. It's not the 90s anymore, as you know, when you get loads of them all the time. But like they're often older. So like 29-year-old Dennis Undav, right, is scoring loads of goals for Stuttgart. But do you want to spend like the amount of money it would cost to get him out of there, like 50 million? Do you want to spend that on a 29-year-old? No, you don't. So what often you're doing is you're buying potential of what might become. So Benjamin Šeško, I think, will become one of the best forwards probably in world football. It certainly seemed that way before, and it could develop into that. But that's what you're paying the money for. So that's really what you get. But you also can't guarantee that certain players in certain leagues will translate to the Premier League, especially. So like Gyökeres is a good example. In Portugal, he scored bucket loads of goals, lots of penalties as well. Yeah. But when you take the player out of Portugal and put them in Premier League, it's just really different.
Yeah.
There's a player at Benfica whose first name I always forget, Pavlidis, who's a Greek striker. He scores loads. I don't think he would score anywhere near as many in the Premier League if he were to move over. But he scores loads there and in Europe as well. So you've got that thing to deal with as well. Maybe quite a good example in the Premier League is Igor Thiago, who has scored heaps this season.
Such an outlier, isn't he?
Yeah, but the thing is, right, so like, how do you create chances for the striker? This is the thing. And Brentford play in a very specific way. They play with lots of fast breaks, they get the ball over the top. And Igor Thiago benefits from that, because what they often do, Brentford, they constantly try and push the ball forward, fast breaks. So a fast break is when you win the ball in your own half and then immediately get that forward and manage to get a shot away from that. So what they'll do is they'll win the ball in midfield, something like this. Someone will give the ball away, the blue team, whoever that is, Everton, for example, give the ball away, and then they'll put it forward to the top. Thiago's always playing off the last line. He gets in behind and he gets loads of 1v1 chances. Or maybe Kevin Shada gets in behind as well and he lays up Thiago, who's also ready to meet the cross. So there's lots of this from Brentford. That's what they do. They win the ball in midfield, they push it forward, that's what they do. But Thiago scored, I think it's 5 penalties, 4 goals from fast breaks. There's lots of shots from fast breaks, but he also gets shots away in the box from headers and stuff like this. So you think, well, maybe he would score some, but he wouldn't score as many because of the way that Brentford plays specifically. But the thing with Brentford is that a lot of the way they can do this by playing over the top is because they are so often in a winning game state. They have been in a winning game state the third most of any team in the league, if that makes sense the way I've said that. So because they are winning, other teams then push players forwards to try and get an equaliser or to get into the game, something like that. And so as they push forward, they leave more space in behind. And so guess what? You can go ping over the top and Thiago gets in behind. So there's a good chance that Thiago, who's definitely like a top-level Premier League player, like he'll score lots of goals every season he plays for Brentford, but would he score as many if he went to another team where he doesn't get that chance because every team sits back and then he doesn't get the balls in behind? That's what you have to think of. So what are you paying for? A player who's going to suit your tactical setup, but Brentford have a very specific one. But once teams start to figure that out and don't allow that space, will Thiago score as many? Will he then be worth as much money? I don't know.
That's a really interesting one. So basically, you can buy a striker, but if the tactical setup doesn't necessarily befit that striker's attributes, they might be good, but not in that team.
Well, yeah, but also you can give more to the team. So a good example, again, is probably Gyökeres. So he does a lot with the Arsenal's pressing and helps them a lot with that sort of stuff. But like Kai Havertz will drop in and give you far more in midfield. So you get someone who drops in and then you can play the ball off him and then you can play around and create for others. But if you do that, then the opposition team can maybe like squeeze up on you and you create even less in behind. So then you need runners in behind. So if you have someone who constantly runs in behind, they push them back, you get benefit from that as well. But some strikers will give you far more. You can play to them immediately. You can play directly. Like I'm thinking of like Jean-Philippe Mateta. He's a big lad, right? But his first touch isn't always that good. So he does drop in and he can like win the ball and help bring others into play, but not always. Some players will be amazing at that. They'll drop in, you can ping the ball to them from wherever, bring others into play, and then you go from there. But what you really want oftentimes is someone who runs in behind and scores goals, but then if they're running in behind, they're not involved in play, so they get very few touches. So it seems like they're not doing anything. So it's a little bit, you can have different players for different situations, but if they also score goals, they're going to cost you loads of money.
Well, the deal sheet here is closed. Check more out on the Athletic website.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.